with a majority of colleges being test optional, a lot of students aren't taking the SAT or ACT test. I mean, it makes sense. It's a hard test. Why would someone put themselves through the stress of studying for it? But what's a little worrisome is that not only are less students taking these tests, and I mean like 700,000 students or more are not taking these tests, but their average composite score is decreasing as well. According to a recent report by the ACT.org, for the graduating class of 2022, their average composite score was the lowest it's been in the past 30 years. Now, whether or not this decrease in average composite score is an indication of the learning loss is still up for debate. There are a lot of factors that kind of play into this as well. It could be students are not studying for these tests. It could be, the grades or the classes that students get into. So it's a little complicated, but that's not really what we're here to talk about today, because with the reality of test optional, parents and students are still left wondering, should my students still take this test? What are the benefits of it? And that's what we're going to cover today.
Hi, yeah, my name is William Jackie, and I work for Strive to Learn, and I work with a lot of students one-on-one and with families, advising them on preparing for college. And so that, the standardized testing is a big topic that comes up a lot. So it's something I have a lot of conversations about, pretty much every day. I think the biggest thing to be aware of is just how colleges are using test scores, and that's to like 80 or 90% of colleges during 2020 and 2021 were not requiring students to submit test scores because of the difficulty of actually being able to do a test sitting.
Mhm.
Now we're starting to get, and that's kind of maintained, for in a lot of ways since then. Like, it's still the case that the vast majority of colleges have a test optional policy where you are not required to submit an SAT or ACT score when you apply. If you do take the SAT or ACT and you get a test score that is average to above average for that college's statistics and their averages, it's a good idea to submit it. If you take it and you get a lower score, or if you're not able to take it at all or choose not to, you're not penalized for it. Your application is evaluated on the basis of everything else. You're starting to see is a slight trend towards some colleges going back to their older policies of requiring the SAT or ACT for all students. So just to give some specifics on that, the region of the U.S. that is most involved in requiring tests again by far is the Southeast, and it's Florida and Georgia, most above all. But those aren't the only regions. So, I mean, for example, all of the public universities in Florida, University of Florida, Florida State, Florida International, aka FIU, University of South Florida, University of Central Florida, those are all requiring SAT or ACT scores. University of Georgia and Georgia Tech are also requiring test scores again. University of Tennessee. A big one for STEM students is MIT. MIT has gone back to requiring SAT or ACT scores. Notably, a lot of the ultra rigorous Northeastern schools like the Ivy League colleges are still test optional. Now, that could change for next year's group, which would be the current sophomores.
Yeah.
So we don't know yet what the policy is going to be for the following year. I think there's a decent chance that more colleges will be requiring it again. But as of now, it's mostly the ones I named. Purdue is another one that Shawnee mentioned just a few minutes ago before we started recording that is requiring scores again. So, what that means for students is it's important to be aware of the colleges you're applying to and what their policy is. I think that not every student is going to need to take or submit SAT and ACT scores. It really depends on where you apply. The counterexample is the California public universities, the UC, University of California campuses, and the California State universities are all test free, which is not even optional. It's like they won't consider scores as part of your application. So they're just really serious about, don't send it. We don't want it. We're not going to look at it. If you're a California resident or someone who lives out of California and is very determined to go to college, in California, There are a lot of, private universities that are test optional, where you can still submit an SAT or ACT, like USC, like Stanford, like Chapman, Occidental College. But the public schools are all test free. So if you're a student and you're determined to only go to a Cal State or a UC, the only reason you would take the SAT or ACT is to be used for course placement, to determine your starting level English and math course. That's the only thing that we use it for. So
Got it. I know we recently had a student who they're in their senior year and they found out that they had to get a certain ACT or SAT score.
She needed like an official test score on file, and they gave her like a specific score to reach, like a cutoff score, a minimum.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's a little bit of a hassle, like to deal with in spring. Like that's not something a senior should have to rush on. Like they gave her basically one more test date when she could do it, and it's in February. So ideally you want some time to be able to study in a sustained period of time rather than trying to cram. That's what research has shown. That's what our experience with test prep has shown, is that trying to cram and just do everything in a short amount of time, it's going to stress you out, and it doesn't you're not going to retain as much, and you're not going to have integrated strategy as much, in terms of how the approach that you have to test taking. Whereas if you can spread it out and do a little bit at a time, like 1 or 2 hours a week over a period of several months, that's going to have a lot more impact in your ability to increase your score and improve on what your initial baseline score was. So, how do you avoid a situation like that? Well, I think it's just being aware and doing research into the colleges that you want to apply to as you're working on building your list of colleges, making the decision of where do I want to apply to.
Which kind of students should look into taking the SAT versus not taking the SAT?
The type of student who should think about taking the SAT or ACT would definitely be students who test well traditionally, students who are good at time tests, multiple choice tests, because it could be what's the phrase, a feather in your quill. It could be just another thing that kind of supports your application profile, demonstrates your college readiness, demonstrates your academic skills. But not just that. So students who are obviously, this should go without saying, but students who want to apply to any colleges that require test scores should definitely test. Students who are hoping for or counting on good scholarships and financial aid options should take the SAT or ACT, because it's not a guarantee, but if you take it and you get a good score, that can potentially help you to get more scholarships or get a higher dollar value on your merit scholarships to colleges.
True. That's right. I forgot to consider the financial aid aspect, that some scholarships require it or some colleges consider it when they're looking at your application.
Yeah, most colleges that are test optional, I've found, are still test optional for merit scholarships, meaning like you can still get merit scholarships without it, but it seems to only help. Like a lot of colleges use an index where it's like, a graph where you have rows and columns, and they cross-check your GPA to your test score. So if you have like a 3.0 GPA, but like a really high SAT score, you can still get a really good merit scholarship. So if you're a student with a GPA that's like in the low 3s or even high 2s, you're technically below the average of most incoming college students, but that doesn't mean you can't still get merit scholarships if you take the SAT or ACT, and that brings you up on the index, so awesome. It can be so it can really be a way to get more financial aid. And I think it really helps you to build time management. It kind of creates a little it puts you in a sort of space where you are tracking your growth, and so naturally that causes you to adapt a growth mindset, because you need to learn from your mistakes. So if you're approaching test prep with a growth mindset, that I think is something that's going to train you for how to use that in all your studies, or at least like you might already be doing that, but it only helps you to apply that attitude of, okay, I don't need to be perfect. I just need to make improvement, and I think that that's actually very relevant for these tests, because it's almost impossible to be perfect. It's like, these are not tests where you're shooting for 100%. These are tests where you're shooting for like 75, let's say, and that's a really good score. If you get in the range of like 1,200 to 1,300 or higher, that's a really good score. So just knowing that you don't have to be perfect, you just have to make incremental improvements, I think practicing with that sort of mindset, like students tend to do for the SAT or ACT, can really be helpful, as you're preparing for college.
So I'm going to pause this episode for a moment because I feel like this is the advice you hear from most college counselors. If you don't score well in your first, if you don't score pretty high in your baseline, you don't have to worry about taking these tests. There's other ways to show your achievements in your college application, which is totally true. However, I think that the act of preparing for these tests also do so much more for students than just a score increase. And so I'm going to play a little segment from last year's episode where our former podcast host and student, Lily, talks about her experience raising her test score from in the low 20s to breaking the 30s.
I think in total, didn't you come up about 11 or 12 points or something like that?
Yeah, it was a lot. I was in the low 20s. I can't remember which one for my composite score, and my composite score
started, right?
Yes, when I started. My composite score September of my senior year was a 32 instead. So it was a lot.
Yeah, I remember it was at least 10-point increase, which, I just want that to sink in with our listeners, because a lot of students start between an 18 and a 21. Okay, that's average. I just want to say that an 18 on the ACT is average. I get so many students who come to me and are like, I want a 30. And I'm like, you do know that's and then 95th percentile of the nation, right? It's somewhere around there, depending on the test. And they're like, oh, wow, what does that mean? It means that you are in the top 5% of all students in the nation. They're like, wow. I'm like, yeah, a 30 is a very high score. So if you start with an 18, please, please, please don't put yourself down for not being where maybe you want to be. Right? This is not, first of all, it's not who you are, nor is it where you will be, right? And then just know there's so many stories that are just like yours, Lily's, right? Lily, the idea of starting in the low 20s and ending up in actually breaking into the 30s, it's totally possible. But I do want everyone who's listening to really hear what Lily said. How long did you prep?
More than a year, about a year and a half.
Yeah, with a little bit of breaks in between, right?
Yeah.
But also some consistent studying. So the study I was talking about earlier did something really interesting. It looked at what is the timing of prep and how does it affect the scores? And they saw that basically for every month that you prep in junior year, you get a much higher score increase. So the earlier you start in junior year, so I'm talking like January start versus like a June start. So any month before June of junior year actually raises your test score significantly. So if you're kind of scared about it, but you're also scared about your APs, don't just wait till you have your APs and then start. Prep concurrently. Yeah. Just start getting into it. Even if it's just an hour per week, just get started. Yeah, block that time out. It will have a really beneficial effect. Even if it's February right now, you can't take your first test until June or July, and you have a lot to do. That's fine. Piecemeal it. Make it small. Make it digestible. Do an hour a week. Do a half hour a week. I don't really care. Do something, because it's not going to get easier by not doing it. And I just think that was so interesting about this study, that that you can really see for every month of studying before end of junior year, you saw a really significant increase. And so I think that's really important. And did you self-study, or did you have a test prep tutor? What did you do, Lily?
So I did a mix. I would say my main avenue for studying was my test prep tutor, Josh, and I met with Josh specifically to work on ACT math, usually 1 to 2 times a week. But Josh sent me home every week with a practice test or a practice section or a set of questions to work on. So I did a few hours of studying on top of my regular schoolwork and regular math every week. And, disregarding the holiday break and I don't know, maybe Labor Day weekend. But it was pretty steady that entire time, and a good mix of self-study and working with Josh.
Yeah, and you took the test, you said 4 times, right? So
I
it wasn't like you got
true.
that. You didn't get that
No.
score increase just between the first and the second, right?
No, not at all. And it was none of them, I didn't go from like 22 to like 30, and then the next three tests were me getting from 30 to 32. Like it was incremental each time, and it just added up.
Yeah, exactly. So, I think that like slow and steady wins the race kind of mentality really does apply to these tests.
Do you have any I want to say final advice for students who are beginning their kind of testing journey right now?
Don't let the test define you. It really doesn't. The test is not a measure of whether you're a good student. It's not a measure of whether you're ready for college. I just want to say that because every score report you get, it says college readiness benchmark, right?
Yeah. It's
So
so mean.
yeah, it really is.
It's so
It really is.
discouraging when you're below it. You're like, well, but I feel ready.
Yes. So just know that. Take this test, really take it as an opportunity to learn how to study long term. These tests are not opportunities in and of themselves to learn anything about yourself, but the studying you do for them, the preparation for them, that's what will really build a skill set for you that's going to be tremendously valuable in college and also for the rest of junior year and senior year. This is the first time where you have to come up with a long-term study plan. Even if you're working with a tutor, you're still responsible, right? For doing your homework, for doing all these things, where it's not in a class, it's just you. It's, everyone else does it differently and at different times. And you have to deal with that and you have to plan it out. And it's a really great way to learn that skill set. How can I study for a long-term test and still, learn something along the way? You may not have to take it if you are only applying to universities who are either test optional or test blind. However, if you can basically create a score that would show a strength that you're not showing anywhere else in your academics, then this is your opportunity, right? So you can apply to a test optional school with your test scores to really strengthen your application. But if you don't like your test scores after you've taken the test, 2 times, 3 times, you're still not happy with it, you don't feel like it'll strengthen your application, then you do not need to apply with it. So my big advice is do the whole test prep thing, whether you do it on your own, using resources like Khan Academy, wonderful SAT prep resources on there, all free, completely free, or working in a more personalized, specialized way with someone like Strive to Learn Test Prep Tutor or any other organization. Regardless of how you do it, you'll learn a lot of skills to really prepare you for college. And if at the end of it, you are not happy with your test score, then you can decide which universities to submit it to or not submit it to. So you still have that opportunity. You don't need to decide that before you decide whether or not to take these tests and prepare for them. Just go for them, do your best, study hard for them. You will learn things that will benefit you tremendously in all other areas of your studies. Lily, I have a question for you.
Sure.
What final advice would you give any student taking this test?
Oh my God. I guess my final advice, my sister is a high school junior right now, and so it's something that has been on my mind recently, as she kind of figures out how to wrangle this process. I guess my final advice would be that this entire test journey is going to seem a lot less scary when you're on the other side of it. And like, that's true of a lot of things in life. But in my opinion, this is one of the most stark differences that I've experienced in life, where between the incredible, terrifying, monstrous image of what it is that you have to do, and then looking back at it and realizing it's really just this tiny thing that you get through by getting through it. You just get through. And I'm proud of the work that I put in over that time period to do that. Yeah, it doesn't do damage to you to do it. I think that was one of my worries at the time, was like, oh no, the stress of this and all of the pressure, and this is really going to hurt me. And there is a lot of stress, there is a lot of pressure, but it doesn't change you and has no impact on who you are. And it is something that you pass through, and eventually it's all okay.
So I lied. That was not my last question to you.
Okay.
I would also love to know how it affected you to actually prepare for these tests over the course of a
Ooh.
year and study for them. Like, what effect did it have on you?
So, one kind of measurable effect that it had on me was I went to a very small high school, and we basically everyone in every grade takes the math level for that grade. There's no like AP math or accelerated anything until I believe 11th grade. Junior, yeah, that's right, junior year. And you can separate into kind of, you can decide, okay, well, I did really well in math this year. I've scored high enough consistently that I can place into a higher level of math. I am generally not a strong math student, and I have never been. But I realized a couple of months into my junior year that I was doing like much better in my regular math classes than I had in the past. And I would credit that mostly to the fact that I had never had to do such rigorous and consistent math work outside of school before. And nothing that had that much structure and kind of study skills built into it. And so I was able, after my first semester of junior year, to place into an advanced math class that only had 5 people in it besides me. And then in my senior year, I took calculus at my school, which is a fairly rare thing. Very few people wind up taking calculus at my school. But essentially, I wound up taking the highest level math class available at my high school. And I would say that's probably directly because I had to do math for a year and a half that I would not have done otherwise, and to build my study skills and my ability to actually critically think about math. And yeah, that really, it assisted my college applications. It made my transcript look, I would say, much more well-rounded than it would have, because I'm a, strong humanities and arts student. And yeah, I definitely think it had a great impact on my regular academics outside of test prep.
And you actually just made me think of something that I also really want to make sure our listeners know. So if you decide that that all sounds really good and you want to have all those benefits too, instead of just stressing out about this test on your own, and you decide that you want to hire a test prep tutor, then I want to make sure that you keep in mind some things to ask them, because there are great test prep tutors out there. There are mediocre ones and there are pretty terrible ones. And they all have different price tags, and some of them have horrendous price tags where it's like, okay, like what are you really doing in that hour with me? I think that it's really important to ask any test prep tutor or test prep tutoring company that you're thinking about working with, how does the tutor, or how do your test prep tutors gauge the learning style of the student, and how do they, mold the standardized test experience to that student and that student's strengths and motivations? That's a really important one, because you'll figure out, or do they make it personal? Because it is not one size fits all. These tests, right? That's why they're hard, because they are the same, and that's why everyone does differently on them, because everyone has their own demons to face in this process. Also, really asking them, what do you do to help build the students' confidence? Like, what are the aspects that you kind of focus on teaching? And hopefully active reading is one of the things that they will tell you. And I really recommend that you hire someone who also really focuses on study skills and on teaching you how to become independent in your studying. So ask them that. How are you going to make me an independent, or able to study well student? Ask them that, because tutors who create dependency, that is not going to serve you well. You really want someone to work with you who will teach you how you can learn how to help yourself, right? And that's the way that you can gain these skills that Lily was talking about. That's the way that you can gain a skill set that will really move you forward and that will carry you far beyond these tests. Because our goal at Strive to Learn, for example, is that getting a really good test score is kind of like a byproduct of doing test prep. Like, the goal of test prep is to really foster confidence, to foster study skills, to help you learn how you learn, you specifically, not other people, like what does your brain do and what helps your brain, and how to think critically. And I'm just going to say it again, confidence, how to be confident in yourself as a student. These tests can tear you down, but they don't have to. They can really build you up. So work with someone who knows that and who can give you some good answers to the questions that I just told you about, because then the SAT and the ACT can actually be a huge opportunity for you as a student instead of a huge hurdle.
Lily and Josephine from last year's episode. I highly encourage you that you check it out. It's really a great resource about the differences between the SAT and the ACT test and gives you some really great timelines on when you should start studying. I will link that in the show notes below. The only thing left to cover is why should students consider taking the ACT with writing section. And for that, we'll head back to William.
Since the SAT phased out its essay portion, the ACT cannot really, the ACT essay can't be required by any colleges, and therefore it's not something that every student needs to do. In fact, probably most students don't really need to take it. I would say the type of student who might want to think about taking it at least once would be someone who can actually get some added value from taking it, which would be someone who's a pretty good writer, or someone who, you know, wants to apply for the type of programs or majors where writing would be an important component of it. So like somebody who maybe wants to major in English or history or social sciences, any sort of field where, like, you know, writing is an important part of the communication. So, you know, students who are good writers, taking the ACT writing portion, which is the essay that's optional, that can be a way to demonstrate writing ability. If you can take it and get an average to above average score, it's basically persuasive, argumentative writing. You take a position on an issue that they give you and support it with, you know, logic and examples. But it's all what's in your head. You can't use any outside research to support your point. So it's mostly about seeing if you understand, you know, logos, ethos, pathos, how to make a convincing case using multiple types of evidence and, you know, strong logic.
Okay. And then I know you said that the SAT, it's not, the changes aren't running until 2024, but just to kind of get a glimpse on it, what are those changes that they're doing or that's causing a big stir, at least in our world?
The SAT is going to be converting to a digital test. So up until now, you know, for anyone who is totally new to this, the SAT and ACT are tests that are on pencil and paper. You know, so you're given a paper test booklet. It's around 50 to 60 pages. You're given a blank bubble sheet, you know, to pencil in your letters for each question. The ACT will continue to be like that. There has been no sort of response from the ACT indicating that they're planning to change anything. Although that's something to monitor for the future, because this whole kind of, you know, synergy between the SAT and ACT, it's been very reactive over the years.
Yes.
Like one makes a change, the other one does something to respond to it. They are competitors and they are in business, you know, mind you, both of them are out to make money. So now the digital SAT. So the deal with it is it's being rolled out first as an international test for spring 2023. So what we're entering into right now, international students are going to be offered the digital SAT first. In the fall of, you know, this coming fall, PSAT is going to be digital. So students taking the PSAT will be taking the digital version. So that will be relevant for juniors. Now, I this is something to double check on because there are multiple forms of the PSAT. I don't know. I'm going to assume they're doing it for all of them. It's possible that, like, the junior version of the PSAT, which is called the NMSQT, which is used for National Merit Scholarship Consideration. It's possible that might still be paper in the fall, but I'm thinking it's probably all of them. So that will affect current sophomores, but not juniors.
Got it.
Because juniors won't be taking the PSAT next year. So to be clear, current juniors who are going to be applying to colleges in the fall, this won't affect them at all. They've already done their NMSQT PSAT.
Yeah.
So this is going to be for current sophomores in both cases. So they'll be taking the digital PSAT in the fall. And then in spring of 2024, the digital regular SAT will be rolled out for all students. So what it is it's going to be adaptive, and it's going to be shorter in terms of the time that it will take. So some interesting changes. Because
like
it's
shorter, right?
A lot shorter. Well, by an hour. So yeah, I guess you could say that's like a cutting off a third of it, which is pretty significant. Yeah.
Mhm.
So right now the tests are about 3 hours each, the ACT and SAT. It's going to be 2 hours, 15 minutes. A
Wow.
lot.
And what do you mean by
Scores will-
adaptive?
Yeah, so adaptive means because it's digital, it relies on AI, it relies on an algorithm, and the algorithm reacts to how a student is performing. So based on how you answer questions in the first part of the test, you will get a second section that is, the questions on it are determined by how you did on the first part of it. That's how it adapts.
Ooh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, now, an interesting thing about that is that affects your final score. And I mean, that's how it is on any test. Like how you do early on is part of your final score,
Mhm.
But it's interesting that like it's going to sort of limit how high you can score if you don't do super well in the beginning, because you're going to get the easier set of questions, let's say, on your second round. And
Mhm.
even if you get all of them right, it's going to cap off how high your final score can be.
Gotcha.
In that way. So, and it's not from what I've heard, what I've been told, and what has been released, by the College Board so far, who runs the SAT, it's not going to be the most complex algorithm. Like it's not adapting question by question.
Okay.
It's adapting to the whole first section, So there's like 2 sections of each, 2 sections of reading, 2 sections of English, 2 sections of math. And, you do the first one, it measures or diagnoses how you did, and then it gives you the second set of questions affected by, so if you did really well, you're going to continue to get really challenging questions, and you're going to potentially be able to score very high ultimately. If you did okay, if you did pretty well but not like excellently, you're going to still get like a decent range. And if you did, and you'll still be able to score pretty well, just not at the top band. And then if you didn't do so well with the initial round of questions, you'll probably find the second section easier, but also there's a limit on how high you can ultimately score. So that's what it means by adaptive. Scores will be released a lot quicker because it's digital. There's not going to be like a waiting period of weeks. It should be within a day or 2 at most, where students will be able to get their scores. Matter of days. Yeah. Rather than weeks. So that can be helpful in the college application process. Students will be able to use a personal device. So it's not going to have to be like specific computers or tablets or anything like that. It's not going to, like, phones won't work. It's going to have to be like a tablet or a computer, like a laptop. College Board says they will provide a device for all students who don't have one. So they are aware of, that there are obviously concerns of equity and access to technology in requiring it to be digital. College Board said they will take care of that. So it seems ambitious, but they're committed to providing devices, and I would assume probably in partnership with schools, they'll be providing devices for students who need them. And the school partnership aspect of it is something that, remains to be seen how it's going to work. But it seems like they are trying to encourage more school day testing, because I think the idea is, again, they're competing with the ACT. They want to get more testers to come to them, and they found, I think, just from studies and the research, that one of the best ways to do that is through school day testing, where the test is offered at schools, to all students who want to take it. So it's not required, you don't have to, you can opt out of it, but it's there for all students that want to take it. You do it at school, so I think they're really trying, and that's a big part of the reason why they're making the switch to digital, is it's going to be a lot easier to do that if it's computer based rather than paper, because that creates a lot of, administrative headache to have to deal with all the forms and everything. So yeah.
Right. And is it a rumor, or maybe I'm just misremembering this? Is the SAT eliminating the no calculator section of the math portion, or do they still have a no calculator section?
Yeah, calculator will be allowed on all. So correct. They are eliminating the no calculator section. So like the ACT, all math questions, students will be allowed to use a calculator.
Interesting. I think it's going to really change how people choose. I feel like there's a, assumption, oh, I'm not good at the calculator, so I'm going to take the ACT. And there's really a lot of differences besides that portion, in the past. Now, I guess they're eliminating that difference, but between like the way that they word the questions itself and the pacing, it's going to be very interesting to see. People will have to be more attentive to which test they'd really
Yeah.
naturally drive with going forward. Because I feel like most students will be like, oh my gosh, it's a shorter test. I'm going to take the SAT, not even care about the ACT. But
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that is going to be a big factor, like an hour shorter, being able to do it on the computer, and like the calculator. There's going to be an integrated, like built-in calculator too, as part of the software for testing. So even if students don't have a graphing calculator, they'll be able to use the graphing calculator that's provided. And it's one that, from what I've heard, I'm not a math tutor, so I'm not super familiar with new developments in like math technology. But from what I've heard, this is something that students are already using in their math classes. It's a particular graphing, like digital graphing calculator that's become very prevalent and popular. So, if it's something that they already have some familiarity with, that would be awesome. Also, like just in terms of the content or format, the reading is going to change in terms of like the structure of it. It's going to be shorter passages, and it's going to be like 1 or 2 questions per passage. So those who might have, those who have seen the GRE, it's going to be more like that. And what that is it's rather than like a passage or article that takes up like a page and a half, and then you get 10 or 11 questions. That's how it's been. They're going to switch it to where you get just like a 1 or 2 paragraph chunk, and then they ask you 1 or 2 questions about it. So you're getting a lot more passages, but you're not dealing with like one whole, you don't have to read a whole article, then do a whole set of questions. It's more chunked up, so we'll see how that affects performance on the reading, because, that's kind of how we recommend students approach it anyways, breaking it into chunks, taking one question at a time. So math, they're going to try to make it less wordy. That's something that I think we've told students for a long time, is the reading level on the SAT is more difficult than on the ACT. The math questions require more reading comprehension skills. The reading passages, are more at a slightly higher reading level, I would say. So they are making an effort to make that more accessible, it seems like. What else? There's going to be experimental sections on the tests where they're not scored, but students won't know which questions are experimental. So,
interesting.
Yeah, that's not something you can really, plan for. But the questions are going to be weighted. Each questions will have a different rating on difficulty level. And the interesting thing is, it's not only going to be about like how difficult is the question, it will also take into account, can you use strategy on it? So they're trying to predict what kinds of what kinds of testing strategies are students going to use. And if this is a question where you could work backwards, for example, like on a math question, they're going to take, they're going to knock off points for that. Like that's going to be less weighted. So yeah, it's interesting. It's almost like they've investigated how are students prepping, how are test prep tutors helping students prepare, and they're trying to counteract that. So we'll see.
That's very interesting. Yeah. I didn't know about that. That's an amazing. They've done a lot of research into how students think and how they learn and how they arrive to the answers that they get to. It's a little scary, honestly. Yeah. All right. Is there anything else that we should be aware of? This has been really great. It's been a lot of information, and thank you for your expertise about this.
I guess just that, for any current sophomores who want to start preparing or even just thinking about the idea of testing, there are already, I think, 2 digital practice tests available on the College Board site for free. So if you want to start prepping, they're going to be rolling out of them. I haven't checked since the new year. They may have uploaded them, but to my knowledge, there are just 2 still that are on the College Board site, and you can take the practice test in the digital mode and see what it's like. So, juniors, you don't need to worry about it. Seniors, you don't need to worry about it. You're going to continue to prep the same way with pencil and paper tests. But for any sophomores or even, especially ambitious or eager freshmen, you can start exploring what the SAT is like. On the digital SAT on the College Board website with the practice tests, and you'll be doing the PSAT in the fall. So it might not be a good idea to familiarize yourself with it a little bit.
Awesome. Thank you so much, William. I appreciate it.
No problem. Always happy to help and discuss these topics.
Bombs of knowledge. Pew! All right, I'm gonna stop recording.
Thanks for listening. As we continue to produce episodes of this podcast, you can follow along on our website, www.strivetololearn.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. Stay tuned for future episodes, and don't forget to subscribe. We'd appreciate any support you can give, including likes, downloads, shares, and good reviews. Got something you want to learn about? Ask us questions in the comments, or DM us on Instagram at Strive to Learn Tutoring. Get the latest updates on the college admissions world and be the first to receive exclusive offers when you subscribe to our newsletter by visiting our website, www.strivetololearn.com. Thanks for sticking around, and I'll see you next time.